While we give people another minute to trickle in, a little bit about me and why I'm the one to be talking about this concept of friendship. My name is Alex McBrairty. I am a career fitness coach. I've been in the fitness industry, in the lifestyle space for over 12 years now. And my foray into this concept of adult friendship really began first with my general interest in psychology. My degree is in psychology, my background is in psychology, this sort of understanding of human behavior I find fascinating. But specifically, friendship, once I relocated away from Michigan, where I spent the first 30 years of my life. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I went to school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I started my business in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I had sort of this life built over the course of those 30 years. And then I relocated 3 years ago to New Jersey, where I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any contacts. And so my introduction into this concept of adult friendship and the challenges that exist there came to the surface when I relocated and realized that I didn't have a social circle anymore. And I realized I didn't know how to build one. So all the concepts that I talk about are rooted in psychology, but also influenced by my personal experience having to rebuild my social circle in my 30s. So all of these concepts are applicable to anyone who finds that maybe their social circle is missing something. It's not as robust as it used to be. It doesn't provide the same value. Maybe you feel lonelier than you have in the past. Or maybe you too have relocated and you find that you're struggling to remake the contacts that you had as you were growing up in your hometown. Wherever you fall on the spectrum of no friends or trying to find new friends or realizing your social life is just not where you want it, then today we're going to talk about a lot of really interesting concepts that are going to help you begin to make sense of what's happening. And that's really my goal for you with today's workshop is really the understanding and some new perspectives for why your social circle has looked the way that it does now and how it has changed over time, and fundamentally why friendship in adulthood is different than when we were children. So today we're talking about friendship redefined, the architecture of an intentional adult connection. But any conversation about friendship has to begin with a working definition of what friendship even means. That's one of the key distinctions that happens in adulthood is that our friendships change, the nature of our friendships change. And so we have to have a definition that matches that. So the definition that I am going to encourage you to take with the rest of this presentation is that friendship is the unspoken agreement between two individuals to care about each other more than the average person. There's a lot of key things with this definition. One is it's specific enough to really understand what friendship is. It's really hard to define this because it's one of those concepts where it's hard to put in words, but when you see it, you recognize it, right? So, friendship is the unspoken agreement between two individuals to care about each other more than the average person. It encapsulates the key part of friendship and how those relationships differ from any random person walking down the street. But it's also general enough to still encapsulate all of the different variations of friendship that we might experience, more of which we're going to talk about here today. So, I want us to consider this definition of friendship for everything that now follows in the rest of today's workshop. But then we have to ask ourselves, why is friendship different in adulthood than when we were growing up? Crucial difference. And the reality is that we never actually learned how to make friends. Most of our friendships in childhood happened as a result of the environment and the circumstances that are built specifically within the school system, but also through some other metrics that we'll talk about here now. And there's really three key elements to why friendships formed easily or more naturally when we were children: proximity, shared experience, and unpressured time. So, with proximity, if you think about being in school as a child, you're spending the majority of the hours of your day, the majority of the days out of the week, most weeks out of the year in a classroom, surrounded by similar or same aged peers for hours on end. And this, well, as it turns out, psychologically, this physical proximity to people is a crucial element to how friendships form. In fact, it's the first stage of what I call the friendship formula, which is this being physically around people begins to develop a sense of familiarity, of comfort, of safety. And that is the birthplace where friendship begins. In fact, research reinforces this. They did a study where they took school-aged children and they measured how close they felt to their classmates depending on how close they were sitting next to them. And what they found is just by merely sitting next to the same person all school year, not only it increased the chances of friendship by 10%, but increases the chance of best friendship. This person being considered your best friend by 10%, just by sitting next to them. So proximity is really, really important. The second is shared experiences. When you're going through school as a child with similar aged peers, you're all going through these milestones of life together and in tandem. So final exams and studying for them, going through puberty around the same time, learning how to drive, dealing with your first crush, all of these experiences you're happening at the same time so you can connect with your peers because you all are going through a similar life experience. And that is one crucial thing that changes in adulthood. And lastly, unpressured time with a noticeable lack of adult responsibilities. And I know this varies from person to person. Some people do have more responsibilities for looking after younger siblings or working a high school job or whatever the case is than others. But nevertheless, regardless of how your childhood looked, you had more unpressured time to just sit around. If you think of summer vacation, just sitting around the house with your friends with nothing to do. In this vacuum of time, you were able to pour into your connections, finding fun things to do and ways to entertain yourself with your friends. Now, when we reach adulthood, really after college, all of these three things shift dramatically. Proximity, especially in modern society, unless we have a job where we're going to the office every day, we aren't around people nearly as much, especially our friends. We can order DoorDash online. We can stream from our home. We don't have to go out in public and be around people in quite the same way. And so not only is it harder to reinforce our existing friendships, but especially if we want to make new friends, we're just not physically around people enough for those relationships to form. Shared experience. Once you get into adulthood, suddenly you start making contacts with people all across various life stages, all age brackets. And what that means is now everyone in your life is experiencing life's milestones on different timelines. Not all of your friends are getting married at the same time. Not all of them are having kids at the same time. Not all of them are retiring at the same time. All of these things are happening at different stages. And that inherently makes it harder to naturally find those points of connection and shared experience. We have to be more intentional with discovering the things that we are experiencing together. And lastly, unpressured time, as many of us here, all of us here know, as an adult, there's always something to do. There's always a responsibility, an obligation, a chore that needs to be done, a task that has to be completed. Everything becomes an agenda. And so seldom do we have the same level of just unpressured time to pour into rekindling or creating these friendship connections. So the challenge is we never actually learn how to make friends. As children, the system is designed so that it naturally happens. But the next concept we're going to talk about is really why these friendships begin to fall apart. And the challenge that we face is that we never learn how to rebuild them. And that challenge that I'm talking about now is the idea of friendship pruning. What they've discovered in the research is that the average lifespan of a friendship is 7 years. 7 years is how long a typical friend will be in your life before it fades away. Now, if a friend stays longer than that first 7 year cycle, it is an increased chance that they will continue to be your friend for the remainder of your life as long as you keep pouring a little bit of energy and attention into that friendship. But the 7 year cycle kind of makes sense because when we look about the various life stages that we go through, 7 years of going through high school and then going off school age, junior high into high school, we're really starting to become social. And then we go off to college and we're around new people, new friends, new faces. Those old high school friendships start to fade away. Now we develop new relationships with our college friends. Then college ends after 4 years or so, and you either go off to grad school or you begin your career. And then those college friendships might also start to fade away, especially if you relocate, if you move somewhere else. Then you're starting your career, you're getting into your first serious romantic relationships. Maybe you're settling down and starting a family. And now there's this clear deviation of getting married and having kids and settling down, and the college friends or career friends that aren't yet. Maybe they're taking their time with it or going a little bit slower. Now you're starting to make friends with your kids' friends' parents. And as they are starting to go through school, and then they go off to college, and now you're no longer seeing their friends and their friends' parents. And now your social circle is constantly evolving somewhat around this 7 year cycle. And the key thing to point out with this 7 year pruning cycle for you specifically is that first monumental drop off in the volume of our friendships. So to make sense of this graph, first and foremost, is when we're a little bit younger, when we're still in school, we might have higher volumes of social connections, but they're less deep. And so that's represented here. The more circles is more volume of friendship, and then the size of the circle represents the depth of the friendship. So the larger the circle, the deeper that friendship is likely to be. So when we're younger, when we're in high school and college, we have a greater size of our social network, but each of those relationships is likely more superficial. As we get a little bit older, the number of friendships we have starts to go down, but the depth of those friendships grows. But there's a steep drop off right after college as we begin our adult lives, truly, where we notice a steep decline in the number of friendships that we have. And that is that moment where the systems we just talked about of organized proximity, the similar aged shared experience and milestones, and the unpressured time that we have as we begin to accumulate more responsibility, all of the system that was in place to allow for friendships to form more naturally goes away. It's now eliminated. And if we never learn how to replenish the friendships that are now being pruned, over time we start to realize we have less and less friends, less and less social connections, and less chances to feel supported in our social lives. So, this first steep drop off is where we notice this gap where we don't have the skills to replenish our friendships. And this is why it's so important to understand the psychological framework for how friendships can form so that we know how to replace the relationships that we lose naturally as we go through life. So, this 7 year pruning cycle, really important concept to understand. But there's another trap that we fall into when we enter adulthood. And I know because I personally fell into this trap. It's called the load bearing trap, which is this idea that when we get into a serious romantic relationship with our partner, with our spouse, that that person can take the role that our friendships previously served. And the challenge with this is that one person is not meant to support all of our emotional and social needs. When we put emotional support, companionship, stress relief, entertainment, personal growth, when we put all of the responsibility of that on one person, our romantic partner, it actually stresses that relationship more than it's naturally designed to do. Because the reality is, all of our emotional needs are meant to be spread across a network of individuals. Partially our romantic partners, absolutely, but also our platonic network of friends to help alleviate overwhelm or the feeling of being burdened on any individual person. And in fact, studies show this. Studies have found that in romantic relationships, where both pairs of the couple have their own strong friendships outside of the relationship that are their own, are more satisfied in their romantic relationship than with pairs where they only have each other for socializing. So, this is a really important concept to understand because the other thing that can trap us is if we are in a serious and happy romantic relationship, we tend to stress putting energy into our friendships less. We deprioritize our friendships because we feel like we don't need them as much anymore. And that can't be further from the truth. Still putting energy into our friendships is one of the best things that we can do to ensure that our romantic relationship continues to thrive. So we want to avoid this load bearing trap or this false sense that one person can serve all of our emotional needs. But now let's talk about the architecture of connection and really the levels of friendship. So we can think of this through three different lenses. The first is depth. How deep are your friendships? And as we're going to learn, a lot of people, when they get into adulthood, assume that if a friendship isn't inherently deep, then it's not a real friend. And one of the perspective shifts I want to leave you with today is the value, the immense value in some of those superficial friendships. So depth is our first lens. Our second lens is purpose. How did this friendship form, or why does it exist in the first place? This can help us understand the role that specific friendships in our lives can play and the value that they can provide. And lastly, emotional role. What do we actually get from this relationship? And how is the energy exchanged in that connection? So, we're going to look at each of these three lenses in a little bit more detail to give you a more clear picture of the architecture of our friendships, especially in adulthood. So, when we're talking about depth, how deep are your friendships? There's really four layers on the spectrum of depth that we can consider. The first is an acquaintance. An acquaintance is this most surface level friendship. And these are people that you probably wouldn't categorize as a friend, but they're not a total stranger. So if you think about going to the gym at the same time every day and you see the same faces because they're on the same schedule or routine, and you don't say anything, but you acknowledge each other and you recognize them, right? That's someone who's an acquaintance. If you were out in a social situation in a strange place with totally unfamiliar faces and you saw them, you'd point them out of the crowd as someone that you recognize, right? But you don't have any emotional connection. You might not even know each other's names. You certainly don't know anything emotionally deep about each other. So it's just somebody that you're familiar with. The second stage is now a casual friend. This is someone that you are occasionally interacting with on a little bit more frequent basis, but there's still not a deep emotional level of support, right? So this could be a neighbor that you occasionally help them shovel snow during a snowstorm, but you wouldn't share personal details about each other with them. You wouldn't share a deep, emotionally driven conversation. Okay, so it's slightly closer to them, but still not someone you're truly being vulnerable with. And then we enter close friends. These are people that you have frequent interaction with and significant emotional depth and trust in those regular interactions. So this is what most of us to probably intuitively consider as like true friendship is someone that we can confide in, someone we can share things with, someone that we truly trust. And then on the further end of the spectrum of depth is a best friend. This is sort of what we consider the highest level of trust, someone who's likely to be a lifelong friend. And this is someone who probably serves multiple roles in our social circle. We'll talk about what those roles are here in a little bit. But this is someone that we rely on more than our other friends. Okay. Now, one thing I want to make clear, having a best friend is not necessary for having a healthy, robust social circle. Not everyone needs to have a singular best friend. And in fact, if we're trying to put the pressure of best friendship on someone when it's not warranted, that also can create some challenges in these relationships. So as long as we have close friends and we have the right close friends, which we'll talk about those roles, there's not necessarily a need to have a best friend. But a best friend is that someone who is kind of the peak depth of our social relationships. The last concept I want to leave you with for this spectrum of depth is this idea of this transactional expectation of our friendships. So, in those first two categories, acquaintance and casual friend, these friendships and the energy and resources you put into them is going to feel a little bit more zero sum transactional. What does that mean? So, for example, if I'm driving an hour out of town for a social event, and if I'm going to carpool with some of my friends, if it's an acquaintance or a casual friend that I'm carpooling with and they're driving me, there's more likely an expectation that I'm going to give them gas money that day, right? So there's this immediate sense of they're doing the effort and expending the resources of driving me. I'm going to pay them back by giving them gas money so that at the end of the day, our energy and resource contribution is balanced. Okay, so there's this immediate transactional expectation. That changes when you enter this close friendship, best friendship side of the equation. As your friendships get a little bit deeper and more meaningful, there's actually becomes less of this immediate transactional expectation and it becomes more of a long-term balance. So in that example of being driven out of town in a carpool, an acquaintance or casual friend might immediately expect that I give them gas money. But a close friend is not going to likely ask me for gas money? Because intuitively, we both understand that at some point in the future, I'm likely going to drive them somewhere. I'm going to pay for their dinner. I'm going to pay their bar tab. I'm going to invest in them at some point at another event in the future so that over time and over the life of this friendship, we are ultimately both going to come out balanced in the time, energy, and resources that we put into this friendship. Okay. So the less deep our friendships, the more of an immediate transactional expectation there is. The closer our friends, the less likely we're going to feel transactional in those exchanges. So that's an important consideration for figuring out sort of where you are in this spectrum of depth. But now let's take a look at that second lens, which is this landscape of purpose. The landscape of purpose is there's really five common ways that our friendships can form. The first is situational. Situational friendships are bound by circumstances. So your neighbors live next door to you, so you see them frequently. You're physically around them more. The parents of your kids' friends, someone that you have to interact with because your kids interact. So situational friends are the most common because we happen to be in a similar situation that puts us in regular contact with each other. That's what allows that relationship to blossom. The second, and it's a type of situational friend, is an activity-based friend. This is a friendship that forms specifically around a shared hobby. Okay, so someone you run into as a regular at your favorite bar, or if you're a part of a running club or a dance community, or if you play pickleball or your golf buddies. These are friends that you make situationally because you're both at this recreational event, but specifically activity based because it's centered around an already shared interest. Okay. So in the case of situational neighbor friends, you might not have the same hobbies and the same interests, but because you're neighbors, that situation is how that relationship formed. Activity based is specifically a shared hobby. The third is workplace friends. And this is honestly still the most common way that adults make friends is through the workplace, less so with the rise in remote work, but nevertheless, workplace friendships, again, are sort of a type of situational friend, but specific to the professional environment. So they provide a space for venting and professional support. The difference of workplace situational friends and other situational friends is workplace friends can be less deep on an emotional level. The emotional role changes, as we'll see in the next slide. The emotional role shifts a little bit. So they might be less personal and more superficial because of the nature and how they formed. The fourth is a childhood friend. This is a friend that was formed through a shared history. You guys grew up together, you went to school together, you stayed in touch. And so this is someone with whom you share a sense of nostalgia with and have a lot of fond memories with. The one caveat with a childhood friend is sometimes as you grow, and you'll grow in different ways naturally, different interests, different hobbies, different life paths, sometimes childhood friends risk becoming friendships of convenience. Workplace friends can do this a little bit, and really all of these can sometimes fall into this category, but childhood friends more than any other. A friendship of convenience is one that we keep merely because it already exists, even if we don't really get any benefit out of it. So imagine you have a childhood friend, someone you've known for ages, and you've grown so differently that now you don't really have anything in common. You have different interests, you have different shared hobbies, or you don't have any shared hobbies. And a good way to know it's a friendship of convenience is when you're together, do you only talk about the past? If you are only talking about past memories and seldom talking about future activities or goals or aspirations, that's likely a good indication that you have a lot less in common. And this might just be a friendship that you're keeping just because it's easy and because it's there. So, childhood friends can be very powerful, but they can also be something that we just keep around out of convenience. And then, lastly, a digital or an online friend. This is a friendship that's formed entirely in a digital space. Now, there is this still growing sense that a friend you make entirely online is not a real friend. And while there is an element of physical proximity that plays a role in friendships forming, an online friendship can still be just as real and just as authentic as an in-person friendship. And as an example of this, I was once a groomsman in a wedding for a friend of mine, a friend that I met training at a local gym. He and I both worked there together, so we saw each other physically all the time. And I was in his wedding. His best man was a gentleman that he met playing video games. So they met in this online chat space playing this video game. They knew each other for 15 years. And for the first many years of their relationship, they had never met each other in person. They only interacted via this online chat form, this chat forum. And it wasn't until many years into that friendship that they discovered they lived just a few hours drive from each other and only then met in person for the first time and had only a few occasions where they actually got together in person. But the majority of their 15-year friendship was entirely online. And it was powerful enough and real enough that that guy was the best man in his wedding. So online friendships can be very real and very powerful, and it is a powerful way to meet people in today's society. So I want to throw that out there. That is one of the ways, one of the purposes that our friendships can form. And I know I'm probably going to run a little late, so I hope you guys have the time to stick with me because we have some really great stuff coming up, but I will try to power through as efficiently as I can. The third lens is emotional roles. What are we getting out of this relationship and what are we exchanging in return in terms of energy and support? So the first emotional role is that as a supportive friend and or confidant. So this is the most common way friendship emotional role that we're looking for, which is marked by high vulnerability. It creates a safe space to discuss deep and meaningful topics and is often considered the most meaningful aspect of friendship. So this is the one that we're sort of the gold standard that we're looking for is a supportive emotional role friendship. The second is a transactional one. So this is marked by a mutual exchange of value. And this is really prominent in more casual friendships, but especially workplace friends. So think networking, think quid pro quo. I'm going to do something for you, you're going to do something for me, and we're both going to benefit as a result of that. Okay. Activity-based friendships can fall in this transactional nature. So if you have a golf buddy that you enjoy golfing with and they can add to your group so that you have someone to play with, that's a transactional exchange. We may not be super emotionally deep with each other, but the value we both get is somebody to share this activity with, someone we can have fun with. Okay. So not all transactional friendships are negative. The third is inspirational. Again, can be common in the workplace, but an inspirational friendship is more of a mentor-mentee style of relationship. So it's usually marked by one-sided vulnerability. The mentee person role in that friendship is sharing more of themselves with the mentor role, who's providing more advice and perspective. And so one is sharing more and the other one is guiding more. And so again, it can be mutually beneficial if the person getting the advice is benefiting from that advice and that mentorship. And the mentor giving the advice feels a sense of value or purpose in being that person for another. So inspirational friendships can be very valuable. And then lastly is a toxic friendship. A toxic friendship is one that's draining more than uplifting. And it's usually marked by either one-sided emotional labor, so someone who's constantly dumping their problems onto you, but is never asking you how you're doing or is never providing support to your problems. They're just looking for someone to solve their problems. Or behind the back criticism, someone who is friendly to you when you're together, but then is saying negative things to you behind your back. This is the worst type of friendship. And if we find ourselves in these relationships, which can be difficult to sever ourselves from, but these are the friendships that we ideally are pruning out of our life so that we're not being emotionally drained in every interaction that we have. So those are the four types of emotional roles that our friendships can take. But now I want to talk about a really important concept, and it's really the last concept we'll talk about today, which is this idea of your A-team social circle. These are the six friendship types that every person should have, the roles that should be filled in their circle of friends to make sure they're getting the most benefit out of their relationships. So not all friendships are created equal. We want a thriving social life. We need a well-rounded crew. But here's the important thing to understand. There's six friendship types. This does not mean you need six different friends. One person can fulfill multiple of these roles, as you'll see in a moment, to create a complete ecosystem for your social circle. Okay. But we want to make sure that all of the six qualities are satisfied in some form, shape, or fashion. Let's talk about what those six roles are. The first is the hype man or the hype woman. This is defined by unwavering optimism for your achievements. So they remind you of your strengths. They push you out of self-doubt when it starts to creep in. They celebrate your wins with zero competition. This is the friend that when you share with them a promotion or an exciting milestone in your life, they want to go celebrate with you. They want to take you out for dinner. They want to take you out for drinks. They want to be there to celebrate you purely because they're happy for you and not with through any form of competition. So, in a very important role to have. The second is the gardener. This is someone who will be happy for you, but they're going to push you to be better. So, their defining trait is constructive feedback. They can see your potential. They push you to reach for more, bigger goals. They sometimes will play devil's advocate just to make sure you're thinking clearly and to provide you with additional perspective. And they refuse to let you settle. So it's important to have this person who sees your potential and reminds you that you can shoot higher. And it complements very nicely with the hype man or hype woman who's going to celebrate those victories along the way. The third friendship type is the mirror. The mirror is defined by unconditional acceptance. And the key trait of the mirror is someone who's seen you through different evolutions of you as a person. So it can sometimes be your oldest friend, but never, it doesn't have to be, but it's someone who has had a front row seat to the different variations of you. So they can provide a sense of nostalgia, but more so deep trust and a sense of being seen through that shared history. So let me give you a concrete example of this personally. When I was living back in Michigan and when I was in college, I had a huge fitness transformation. I lost nearly 100 pounds and it completely shifted my identity of who I was. It shifted how I showed up in the world and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And in Michigan, everyone that I knew either knew me through that transformation. So they knew the out of shape Alex and now the in shape Alex, or they had met me somewhat shortly after that transformation where the effects of it were still new and still noticeable. That story was still relevant. Then 10, 15 years later, I moved to New Jersey. And everyone I meet in New Jersey knew me as this version of me, the confident, outgoing person who was fit, regularly active. This is the version of Alex they knew. A lot of people in New Jersey never knew about the transformation that I had. So they didn't understand the evolution that I went through. And the interesting thing about this is there were moments where I felt less seen because people assumed this is who I always was. They didn't see the work that went into it. They didn't see the years of slowly evolving and becoming this version of me. They just assumed this is who I'd always been. And so there's a level of being understood and being seen that was missing by not having someone in my social circle who could see all the different variations of me. Now, this doesn't mean that I can't meet someone today, and I haven't met people today who know that version, that story of me, and can now put the pieces together and provide that in my social circle. But this is ultimately the value of a mirror, is they've seen the versions of you so that you feel truly seen in that journey of becoming. So that's the mirror. The fourth friendship type is the confidant. This is an incredibly crucial role that provides emotional depth. So this is the person that creates the safe space for those soul-filling, vulnerable conversations about life, about values, about purpose. This is the person you're going to be up at 2 a.m. with, talking about those really deep conversations about who you're becoming and what the life you're building. And they provide that emotional space and that emotional support for you. And that's a crucial role to have in your circle. The fifth is the spark. This is the fun friend. This is the one who brings energy, spontaneity, a sense of adventure. This is the person who tends to be the life of the party. So they're going to, when you're in a rut or when you're feeling down or you've had a tough week, they're the one that's going to drag you by the hand, take you out, provide a distraction so that you can have fun and get a little bit of stress relief. So it's important to have this spark friendship in your role too, to have that fun friend that can be that welcome distraction. And then lastly, the anchor. The anchor is physical reliability. So similar to the confidant's always going to be there for you emotionally. They're the 2 a.m. conversation. The anchor is someone who's going to be physically there for you. They're going to be the one that shows up at 2 a.m. when your car breaks down to make sure that you have someone to help you change your tire or sit with you and wait while AAA comes to help you out. So they're going to physically show up to events to show their support. So the confidant's going to be a little bit more philosophical, perspective driven. The anchor is going to be that physical support. Now, as I said earlier, the friends that serve these roles can be the same person. So, for example, the hype man or hype woman and the gardener can be the same person. The person that pushes you to reach your potential can be the same person that celebrates you along the way. The confidant and the anchor can be the same person. The person who's going to have the 2 a.m. deep conversations can be the same person that shows up for you at events. And the other thing I want to bring to attention is from the spark, that fun friend, that welcome distraction is there can be value in casual friendships. So your fun friend might not necessarily be the person that you have the deepest emotional connection with. But if their role is taking you out and giving that welcome distraction and injecting fun and adventure into your life, that in and of itself serves an important purpose in your life. And then you can have a confidant that's somebody else to be your emotional support. So this is the important thing to understand about filling these different roles. And I want to also provide you with this concept. Imagine you have a friend that's your confidant and your anchor. They are there for you. They hold that safe space for you to be vulnerable. But maybe they're incredibly introverted. And maybe they don't like going out and being around a lot of people. Maybe they have a lot of anxiety in those situations and they're just not the fun friend. If you're starting to resent your confidant for not being the fun friend, and the confidant is starting to experience a lot of pressure to an overwhelm because they can't provide that fun for you, this can cause a rift in your relationship. When the reality is that confidant is just supposed to be your confidant, and it's somebody else that should be your fun friend to take that role and provide that benefit, which then alleviates the burden on your introverted confidant to not have to be that person. They don't have to be spontaneous. They don't have to be adventurous. They don't have to be something they're not. They can just serve the value that they provide for you without the extra stress and pressure. The one thing I want to say too, as I'm talking about value that you're getting from these roles, obviously it's very important to understand that in all of these exchanges of effort and resources, we're also ideally giving it back equally, right? So we're getting value from these roles, yes, but we're also serving as one or multiple of these roles for other people in our life. We are exchanging this value back and forth socially in the ways that we show up. So it's important to understand that concept as well. And that's actually what I want to leave you with is to start to consider what is the friendship type role that you play in your social circles for your friends. Are you the confidant? Are you the anchor? Are you the fun friend? Are you the spark? Are you the mirror? Are you the hype man or hype woman? Or are you the gardener? Or are you multiple versions of those roles? So I want you to consider what that is. And what I also encourage you to do is you can scan this QR code to take my friendship type quiz. And it's going to tell you two things. One, it's going to tell you what friendship role you are likely playing in your friends' lives. And two, it's going to tell you which of those six friendship types you're most missing currently in your social circle. So it can help to clarify what type of friends you should be looking to help fill that missing role. And while you're scanning that QR code to save that quiz, I also want to just summarize very briefly. Friendship is intentional in adulthood. Those three factors, proximity, shared experience, and unpressured time, exist systematically and environmentally as children and then goes away shortly after college. And so friendship is no longer accidental, it has to become intentional. Friendships can also vary in their structure and in their purpose, right? We have our depth lens. We have the purpose or the ways that those friendships were created, and we have the emotional role that they play in our lives. And people can fall anywhere on the level of depth. The purpose of the friendship can shift and the emotional role can be different, but that doesn't mean those friendships are valued any less. And lastly, different friends serve different roles, and that's okay. It's about understanding what role this friendship is playing for you, what role you're playing for them, in making sure that you have all of the roles satisfied so that you get the most benefit and outcomes from all of the friendships that you maintain in your life.